Greetings, we'll be taking a look at the TextureGraph plugin in 5.4, the preview to be more precise, but I doubt there will be much difference. You have to enable it first in the plugin section. Because it's in the experimental state, the name might actually change in the newer engine versions. Now you right click and go into the texture section and click on the texture graph to make a new one. You can name it whatever you want. And double click it. So let's take a quick tour. In the center, we got the graph section like in Blueprints. And on the bottom right, we got the viewport with Node Preview on top of it. And a toolbar with save and export options. Now on the preview node, there is also an option to view the histogram. And on the viewport there, we can also click the preview. I think the preview is not enabled by default, but when you go to window, you can enable it. Or as any hidden layout in UE. And on the top left, we got the nodes that are included in this version. Now the viewport is set to unlit for reasons. You can set it to lit, but you have to enable the show environment in the preview environment for you to have like the normal preview layout if you want that, along with different preview mesh or a custom mesh. Now that we have the output node selected, we see the details on bottom left. We got the texture name, the resultant one, the path, the width and height of the resultant texture, which is set to auto by default, which means it depends on the input resolution. And then you can also change the texture format along with what texture result this node might be. Also the texture LOD group and the compression setting, and if it should have sRGB enabled or not. Now the texture type, when you select something, it kind of locks the LOD texture group and the compression. So I thought it might predetermine those two settings for you, but it did not. Now if you click the down arrow on the node itself, you can see these settings, and you can also click that to have an easier path selection. This kind of goes for all of the nodes. They have a drop down option, and depending on the variable, it might be easier to change in the detail panel or on the drop down. Now when you right click, we got the nodes, and you start with the texture node, which is the simplest. You can select texture. We'll go with the icon. And because we have selected the texture node, we can see the preview and the node histogram, which is also another preview method, and you can disable or enable the specific channels. And when you connect it, we can see there are some translucent part or transparent. Let's look at the split channels node, which is simple. We can split the channel, and there is also the combine channel, which can combine it. The alpha channel is responsible for the translucency, as can be seen, so we can input a scalar here. Now a bug that I have found is that you can connect scalar to such inputs, but not the other way around. So you can't connect the split channel to an input that is scalar. And also, as can be seen, you can change the texture dimensions anytime in any of the nodes there. So it gives you a lot of control. Another node is the brightness and contrast node. You can control the brightness and the contrast. And also convert to grayscale, make it grayscale. Some other nodes about converting RGB to HSV or vice versa. There's also this levels node, which lets you control the lows, mids and highs of the texture. So in this case, I prefer the details panel because of the sliders rather than changing the scalar, but that's just personal preference. Now the threshold mode, which makes anything below it black and anything above white. It would be better understood if it was used on a black and white texture. Now another one is blur, which I think is good. Can blur out the image, and you got different options: the Gaussian, directional, and radial, each with their own settings. And we also got the input color. You can input the color. Now textures aren't the only input that you can provide. You can actually provide material outputs, which is really good, because those of us who are used to materials are much better using that and just bake it here in TextureGraph. So an example, let's make a sphere mask. We'll connect it, and the radius just 0.2 should be, yeah, good enough. And just for sake of more experimenting, we will change this and input it into the emissive. Now we select the material here. You can see got the material output here. And also material functions can be used, which is an alternative, which is also really good. Let's see, gray. Yeah, this is a custom thing I've made. Um, with this texture I made before, and you can see it actually processes the texture or the material function. Yet another option is to use other texture graphs. Now, in this project, I only have this one, so I cannot select it, but you can also reuse other texture graphs. The vector node, self-explanatory, and we go to the math nodes, starting with the blend. Now, with the blend, the foreground alone is not enough. You got other options with add, divide, minimum, maximum, usual stuff you can find in other DCCs as well. Let's hook this one up. You can see this with the min, you can change to add, it becomes like this. So anyone familiar with this node in other DCC should be familiar with this one as well. So we got the other one, exponential floor, if then else like a boolean or a branch check in blueprints, square root, square, trigonometry with sine, cosine, tangent, and the arc versions of them. There's a material ID node, and the comment is just normal comment. On the procedural side, we got the noise node. So you can see what this is. Should be self-explanatory, to be honest, with people familiar with noise stuff already. You can see the histogram. We change the amplitude, changes as well. And you can change the dimensions or the resolution there. Something to notice next to the detail tab, you got the parameters. So you can actually change the parameters from here, which is like a quick menu to change the parameters there as fast as possible, which is a nice addition. So the other procedural would be pattern, but before that I forgot to mention something in the material. When you connect it, you can actually choose the output pin. In the material we made, it was the emissive and base color only, but you can change that to whichever you want. Getting back to the pattern node, you can change the repetition of X and Y and offset it. So either horizontally, vertically, and you can see a lot of parameters here and there. Some of the parameters may not do something for this because they may be doing something else for other shapes, as this is the square shape only. Now change it to circle. Some of the nodes might do something, some others may not. Another pattern would be checker. The other one is gradient. So back to square, change the bevel here because I want to show something else. Now we can get the normal from height map. So it may not be that visible now. I get back to the node itself, increasing the resolution and also increasing the strength. It's clamped, so you cannot increase it further, but we can change the offset. Now we can also have other output nodes. So for example, this one, I'll name it second. And let's get the shape. Now let's change the preview to this second output. I remember doing something like that, but now I cannot find out how I did it, so I just exchange the output nodes. Looking at the shape node, we got the circle first, then we go to segment. You can see still same here. You can also have a sign distance field. Make it a sign distance field. Change the rectangle. Can change the many things actually. You have multiple shapes you can choose from, and also parameters. That should cover most basic needs. Oh, we have the transform. Um, so we'll hook up the shape node into the transform and adjust the transform. Mirror here it would not do much, but you can see change the coverage if you want to have a part something or part texture, and don't forget that also the different parts can be added together. There are offsets. This transform mode mostly how can I say, is equivalent to the UV manipulation you would normally do in the material editor. You can have the filled color here for the transparent, so the supposedly transparent part. We have the stagger for horizontal or vertical, and the stride. We also have this show debug node. It is good. There is the purple outlines for the thing itself, and also if you look closely, we can see that even the transparent parts still have the debugging here or present. Now this should be enough. Let's export. You hit the export, and it tells you which one you want to bake. I want to bake both. And we have an error about path. At first when I changed the path, I made it invalid, so let's put a valid path, and now let's export. And it has exported as expected with the dimensions, but we can see the debugging still is present in the output image as well. And we didn't make the normal, having true normal settings. So let's change this. We'll choose normal. This is what I mean by it wouldn't bake well. So now we look at it and you can see it hasn't changed much for the normal, but the debugging have disappeared when we disabled it, which is good. So we have to choose the LOD texture group to world normal and the compression to normal, and now we have the normal with the correct compression. Now if you have experience with the material editor in Unreal and bake the materials into textures using render targets, you would ask, why does this exist? And the answer is for a couple of reasons. Mainly for people who are used to other DCCs like Substance Designer, Material Maker, or Blender. It's more streamlined or is closer to those set programs. Another benefit is that you already have the sliders ready, so you can adjust them. You would typically do that in the material using material functions, but then you have to input some of the numbers. So this is a bit better or a faster iteration than that. And personally, the benefit that I found most useful for me was being able to bake 32-bit textures, which I couldn't do that with a render target method in 5.3. Now this isn't all perfect, like how you cannot input material functions scalar or vector 2D with texture inputs because they're different, and even if you split them, still you cannot connect them. I also couldn't find some basic math nodes, namely frac or fraction. You can use a material function to bypass it, but then again you run into the previous mentioned issue. And what I would consider a critical bug with this plugin is whenever I try to save a texture graph and then restarting the project, it would crash the project from the startup or from the get-go. I hope this is fixed in the actual 5.4 release. But if you go out of the scope and look at the general overview, UE is trying to become an independent program that can do almost everything. Now all that's left is for the Quixels mixer to be integrated into Unreal, hopefully 5.5. Then you'll rarely have to go out to other DCCs and do all the work inside Unreal. And this hypothesis is further strengthened by the fact that UFN exists, so they are trying to promote people to do the work inside the editor without having to actually leave the editor itself or other programs. Hope you found this useful later.